from Kentucky.
Mr. Chair, my amendment is quite simple. It expresses the sense of Congress that the Department of Education and the Secretary of Education should no longer have any authority to administer any program related to elementary or secondary education in the United States. Some people may confuse the purpose of my amendment, and let me be clear, it is to strengthen public education in the United States. I'm a product of public education. K through 12, I attended public schools, as did my wife and all of our children. We're proud of our schools in this country. But it's time to turn in the grade card for the Department of Education. They've been at it for 40 years, and they get an F. Education has not improved, but spending has doubled per pupil. It's time to return the power back to the states and back to the people and back to the school boards and to allow them to make these decisions locally. At this time, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my friend Josh Burkeen from Oklahoma.
Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you to the chair. September 24th, 1981, in his address to the nation on the Program for Economic Recovery, President Ronald Reagan made the following comment, quote, "As a third step, we propose to dismantle 2 cabinet departments, energy and education. Both secretaries are wholly in accord with this. Some of the activities in both of these departments will, of course, be continued either independently or in other areas of government. There's only one way to shrink the size and cost of big government, and that's by eliminating agencies that are not needed and are getting in the way of the solution. ... By eliminating the Department of Education less than 2 years after it was created, we can not only reduce the budget, but ensure that local needs and preferences, rather than the wishes of Washington, determine the education of our children." Ronald Reagan. The Federal Department of Education was created in 1979. Many people can't even remember a time when it was not a creation. But there was such a time. 200 years our nation flourished and had rigorous education absent the Federal Department of Education. I, too, am a product of public education. But I contend if we want to empower parents, end the hypersexualized woke culture that's invading our classrooms, we need to give school board members and parents the ability to determine the education of their children and empower them by returning to the brilliance of our founding fathers, the 18 enumerated powers that list those things that the federal government should do. Education is not mentioned. That's why Thomas Jefferson made the comment, in order for the federal government to be involved in education, you have to have a constitutional amendment. We need to follow the advice of our founding fathers, put this back in the hands of our state, and they can determine what is happening in the classroom. That is the success for our children, for this country. And I yield.
Time.
Gentleman from Kentucky reserves. For what purpose, Mr. Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, whenever we encounter an attempt to dismantle the Department of Education, it's clear that we're undermining public education, and yet even the founders of our great nation were committed to education. Moreover, without a federal role in education, when states were left to their own devices, we lacked a common set of standards for high-quality education, high-quality teachers, and high expectation for student outcomes, and many students were left behind, such as racial minorities, low income, those with disabilities, those with English as a second language. The federal role in education assures a level playing field for all of our students and especially provides funding to help the most needy students. Moreover, the federal role of education is still trying to live up to the promise of Brown v. Board of Education, the 1954 decision. In that decision, the Supreme Court said that the education is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms, and further that racially segregated, so-called separate but equal education was inherently unequal. The GAO just recently, as starting in 2016, found that public schools, unfortunately, are still segregated. As a matter of fact, more segregated now than any time since the late 1960s. July 2022 found that more than 1 in 3 K through 12 students attend essentially racially segregated schools. So we still have work to do in that area. We still have work to do to fulfill the promise of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We're not fulfilling that promise. So we still have a lot of work to do on the federal level. There is a federal role for education. The Department of Education is working on that, fulfilling that responsibility. And for these reasons, I oppose the amendment and urge my colleagues to vote no. I reserve the balance of my time.
As my colleague from Oklahoma pointed out, Congress lacks the constitutional authority to create what amounts to a national school board of unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. How many are there? 4,000 bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. My colleague on the other side of the aisle said that basically every school would like to have more money. How could we do that without raising taxes? Quit wasting it in Washington, D.C. on 4,000 bureaucrats who cost us about $100,000 apiece. These bureaucrats make more than the teachers, yet they don't teach a single class. They don't write books. They don't help with that. In fact, the federal government's responsible for about 90% of the red tape that local schools have to deal with and only about 10% of the funding. It's time to change that equation. Imagine if we could hire 4,000 more teachers in this country using that money and pay them each $100,000. Pay them what the bureaucrats get in Washington, D.C. How many more kids would get a better education? I suspect a lot more kids would get a better education. This was a re-election ploy that was foisted on America by Jimmy Carter and Congress at the time in 1979. It did not work. He did not get reelected. It was not a good idea. But here we are, we're stuck with it. It's time, as I said before, to reevaluate this. I urge my colleagues to vote for this amendment, to show that we support public education. We support the rights of parents to determine through their school boards the rights of teachers. The teachers know what to teach and how to teach. They don't need the federal government telling them. What your child learns or how your child learns shouldn't be dependent on who won the presidential election and who became Secretary of Education. It's too important to leave it up to that. You need to leave it up to your community, to the teachers and the parents. With that, I urge adoption of this and the underlying bill, and I yield back.